Hello, welcome to some quick background on the book we're about to start, Thousand Miles to Freedom by Yun Sung Kim. All right, so when you're reading this is a book written by a North Korean defector. There's a few things to keep in mind if you've never read North Korean memoirs before, and I'm going to point out. So read them with some skepticism because we can't really confirm a lot of what they're saying. Some of the defectors, they'll write books and they'll eventually contradict themselves later on when they're giving interviews or even later on in the books. So some of the things you have to give a little bit of skepticism. Other things leading to skepticism, besides the fact that we can't always confirm what they said, you have to keep in mind why they're writing, what their bias is, why they're writing it, and the audience that they're trying to target. These are things we always look at when we look at memoirs, but I think they're sometimes a little bit more prevalent when we're looking at North Korean memoirs. A lot of these memoirs don't sell too well in South Korea, but they're published in South Korea first and then picked up elsewhere. And so that can sometimes lead to certain things that sound a little weird when you're reading them, like when they're really saying so far to one extreme, positive or negative about certain situations. You can sometimes wonder if, how much of that came from their bias or the audience or whatever. Some other things you'll see in a lot of North Korean memoirs are the hope for reunification. A lot of times they'll talk about how they think it's coming very, very soon, that North Korea is going to fall, people are going to overturn the government, something's going to happen, and they're both going to be reunified. Even some of the memoirs I've read where people aren't quite as optimistic about North Korea changing and accepting the South will often say that they still believe something will happen and North and South will combine again. So you'll also see a lot of the people who write these memoirs, they have trouble adapting to South Korean society. If you think about what they're coming from when you read this book and you see like how little technology, how it's a very different society. I mean, even if you've seen Crash Landing on You, you'll see two very different societies at the start, and so it can be uh, kind of hard to adapt to this entirely new society, new technology, new norms, this competitiveness for education, and these other, the focus on plastic surgery and makeup and all these other things that really weren't as powerful motivators in the North. So you'll see things related to how hard it can be to adapt sometimes, especially with older individuals, people in their 30s and above. We also see a lot of a combination of hope, hate, and sadness. Sometimes it's hope that North Korea will change or that they can go back someday or that they'll be reunified with their families. Sometimes it's hope for their future. You also see a lot of hate sometimes for where they came from, mixed with the happiness of where they came from. So there'll be this clash of that. You'll sometimes see hate for where they are, and this goes back to just this trying to get used to this new society, things being so different than what they're used to. Sometimes there'll be outright hate for the government or people that they used to love, and then this causes all sorts of problems because you've got this dichotomy in your head of I love this person, I've always loved this person, but now wait, I see this person in a different lens, so I have both these feelings of love and hate towards this person or my homeland or whatever. And there will often be a lot of sadness. A lot of North Korean defectors have to deal with depression when they get to South Korea, China, America, wherever, and depression for things they went through, depression for where they are right now, where they thought their life was going to be, losing different things they never thought they would lose. And some of this can come from just having your entire worldview shattered and have to have it remade. So keep a lot of that in mind as you're reading. That these memoirs are going to be very different than some of the memoirs that you've probably read before. All right, so real quick, just real basic bio of our author here. I don't want to give away too much because it's a memoir. You're going to get her bio. So she was born in 1986. Most of this book is going to take place a little bit before puberty, but she's still pretty young. So we're looking at the 1990s through 2000s. So she's going to go from North Korea. Eventually, she, her mother, and her sister are going to get to China. while in China, a bunch of things are going to happen, including having a half brother. And then from China, she and her mother are going to make it to South Korea. Eventually, her sister will join her. And then in South Korea, she's going to go to college and have the opportunity to travel to other places. She will travel to the United States, uh, to Europe. So just that's just a real quick, very superficial bio because I don't want to give away anything that's in the book. All right, so North Korean culture. If you're not familiar with North Korean culture, this is just the most basic, broad kind of overview I can give you. There's so much that could be talked about. Unfortunately, there's so much we don't really know and we can't truly confirm. So that becomes a bit of an issue with North Korean memoirs. Uh, this one takes place right around the start, the same time as most of the North Korean memoirs that I've read, having to do with the Great Famine. So if you're not familiar with the Great Famine, it happens in the mid to late 90s. We have a number of issues that contribute to this. There's issues with weather and climate issues that were going on in North Korea at the time, whether it's drought and then some flooding. We have it's exacerbated by a lot of deforestation that's happening, causes a lot of problems. We got the fall of the Soviet Union before this. Soviet Union was really propping up a lot of North Korea with fertilizer and economic support, buying and selling things that North Korea needed. So when the Soviet Union stops giving its support, stops giving its aid, there's a huge economic crash. Like I said, things like fertilizer, which are going to lead to lack of crops, and then we got the deforestation and the drought, and then the flooding. Those are also going to affect crops, and so we have very little food coming in, very little money coming in, and very little homegrown food that's going to cause a lot of problems. The death toll for this, I mean, you can find numbers online that range anywhere from uh, what 200,000 to close to 4 million people dead in just those 4 year, 5 year spans of time. Again, we can't really confirm this because North Korea is a very closed state. So uh, a lot of the memoirs, though, do talk about dead bodies just lying in the streets. So I think we can guess the numbers were probably pretty high. Now the famine actually led to a lot of long term things changing in North Korea that North Korea is dealing with right now. So we had a lot of the most loyal people to North Korea, outside the capital especially, are said to have starved because they were just so convinced. They bought into the regime and everything. They're so convinced that food was going to come, that North Korea was going to take care of them, that they didn't violate the laws by going to the black markets. And a lot of these people ended up starving to death. You'll see that very early on in this book, and you'll see that in a lot of North Korean memoirs about the deaths, the people just dying in the streets, people being too hungry, just starvation. So the most loyal people are the first to die in the famine. Then you have the people who were maybe a little more skeptical about the regime, a little more willing to break the law or bend the rules. And we get this rise of black markets. You know, people making the trip across to China, buying supplies, bringing them in, and starting up these illegal black markets. Now, keep in mind that this free enterprise black market type thing, completely illegal. Theoretically, punishment could be sent to a prison camp, execution, not just you, but your whole family. So, pretty big, severe punishments. But these were popping up, and a lot of the people who were in charge of cracking down on these were benefiting from them. They were either taking advantage of buying the food that they needed to keep themselves and their family alive, or they were taking bribes to look the other way. So now we have people who were maybe a little less buying into the system. They were a little skeptical about the system, getting all those skepticisms reinforced because they're seeing the people who bought in starving to death while they're able to survive. And we see not only a lot of these people surviving, but really prospering. There are accounts of people who were able to buy trucks, which was almost unheard of. And they're buying these trucks and they're bringing in loads full of things and they're making lots of money. North Korea has tried to clamp down on this by all sorts of different measures, including, banks and currency. And anyhow, so we've got all that going on. The black markets will start to do things more than just food. I mean, we got black markets selling clothing, furniture, DVDs, you name it, whatever that they're bringing in that people are going to buy. I mean, it's a full capitalist market going on. And what we're going to see a lot of is stuff coming in from South Korea. So we're going to get a lot of K-dramas and K-pop and all this other stuff going on. And as people are watching this and hearing this and reading this and seeing this, it's going to lay seeds for more people to not really buy into the government, to have more skepticism. Now, granted, a lot of the people buying this stuff already have some skepticism. So again, it's being reinforced. So we have some clampdowns happening right now. In fact, there's slang that's being outlawed in North Korea that's seen as coming from the South, and it's leading to the erosion of the culture, and I forget what else they say, but basically trying to stamp it out. What was that famous movie? Was it Footloose, where the whole town was against dancing, and it was going to lead to the corruption of all the youth in the society? I think kind of like that, only ratcheted up several extremes. So we've got that going on. There are a lot of people in North Korea today who are familiar with K-dramas and K-pop and Korean makeup, South Korean makeup, and all sorts of things, as well as stuff from China. All right, so moving on. Keep in mind, North Korea is a military state. Joining the military isn't really an option, it's a requirement. And we're talking a very long military service. So you're in there for quite a while, and they specifically send you away from your home, far away, to make it so you're kind of stuck in the middle of nowhere. You don't know anybody. It makes it so that you really can't defect or leave or whatever. So it's mandatory service. You have people in the military and you have people in the towns, the communities who are willing to denounce people. In fact, that's kind of their job, some of them. So if you're saying something you're not supposed to be saying, if you're caught watching one of those K-dramas, you're caught with using the slang or dressing, even the way you dress now is being clamped down on by the North Korean government. So if you're caught with any of these things, you're denounced. Your family can be moved to a camp, whether it's for a short period of time or forever, or executed. You're constantly living in fear of your neighbors. So it's a great way to keep the communities from forming together and having a tight bond when they're constantly worrying about each other. And that helps to keep the people fighting with each other so that the government can stay in charge. So we've got the state-controlled media and communication, which also helps keep the government in charge. So everything that goes on is completely controlled, edited. We do have women in the military. In fact, I got a picture up here for you. So something to keep in mind, though, as you're reading this, you're going to see that our author here, her mother is doing everything that you would expect of someone in more or less an equal gender equality success society. So it's really interesting when you see that we have women in the military, men in the military. We have women who are running the household equally with the men, or even maybe sometimes more powerful than their husbands. So we do get an interesting situation there. We haven't had a leader in the current North Korean communist government that was a female, but that said, Kim's sister here is expected by some to be the next in charge. We'll see if that does actually happen, but we could end up with a female leader of North Korea in the not too distant future. Let's see. So the camps, there are multiple camps all over North Korea, and these are where people are sent. They're forced work camps. The The conditions are not great. Physical abuse, mental abuse, lack of food, extreme work. There's all sorts of issues going on. Some of the more extreme memoirs have been written about this, talk about some of the beatings and rapes and things like that. Again, none of this can be completely verified, but there's enough uh, of the memoirs talking about the beatings and things like that that we can probably say with some certainty that the beatings are happening, the lack of food is happening. Now, how much that's happening from lack of supplies and how much is intentionally used as a more or less a form of punishment and torture, that's something you have to kind of decide for yourself. There's a big amount of saving face in North Korea. In fact, if you do get to go to North Korea, they have museums set up where all these different gifts from all over the country, or all over the world, have been sent to North Korea, and you'll have all these different ceremonies that go on, all this stuff to show you that North Korea is loved by everybody around the world, and North Korea is feared by everybody, and respected by everyone, and is as powerful as any other country, and rich as any other country. But a lot of this is a facade. You scratch below the surface, and you'll see it just doesn't hold up. I mean, there's a massive building North Korea was building to try and rival any other building project happening in the world, and it can't be finished and used because it was built so poorly. So we've got all sorts of issues going on. In fact, if you want to see something about the saving face, there's a great TV show on, I believe the network's called Vice. It's a wrestling based TV show, and it talks about all the different wrestlers and their dark things in their lives. And they just did one about recently about WCW sent some wrestlers from Japan and the United States over to North Korea as a big, it was supposed to be like a peace event. And the people of North Korea were forced to attend this event. No idea what wrestling was. They had to sit there, had to watch because they could be executed if they weren't. The wrestlers had to bring flowers and smile and lay them at the feet of the statue of the great leader to show that they loved the great leader and how great he was. And again, it was all kind of a face, this respect and face and things like that. One other thing to keep in mind: officially, North and South Korea are still at war. When the Korean War ended, it was America and North Korea that signed kind of an armistice, not North and South Korea. So we still have a big demilitarized zone between the two with active military on both sides. We still have issues with spies. I mean, if you watch the news, you'll see there's missile tests and boasting about having these kinds of missiles and working on the nuclear bombs and boasting about having nuclear bombs and all sorts of things like that, which stem from this. This also leads to a constant amount of propaganda about America and South Korea, which is seen as America's puppet, are just waiting for North Korea to slip so that they can invade, conquer, destroy North Korea. So this is constantly being sent out in various forms in North Korea. So that was just again, super basic, surface level. If you're not familiar with North Korea at all, again, a lot of it is hard to verify, but some additional readings if you're interested. So staying with the theme of our book group here, there's Without You, There Is No Us. An interesting memoir. It was about a South Korean woman who's a teacher. She goes to North Korea and works at a school where she's teaching the children of the most powerful North Koreans there were. So think of it as like, I don't know, the Illuminati had a school or something like that, and a Skull and Bones Society or whatever. And she's working at that school teaching these students. It's very interesting to see kind of the mindset she has as a South Korean going into North Korea. But one of the downsides to the book, things I didn't like, is she looks at everything as an either this or this possibility. The students lied to her about voting. So she believed there are only two possible reasons why they lied about voting. Students would say this, and so she would say, well, there's only two reasons why they would do it. They did it because of this, or they did it because of that. In the real world, we tend to have more than two reasons why people do things. So that was one thing I didn't super enjoy about the book, but other than that, very interesting read. The Girl with Seven Names is another very popular North Korean memoir. So I would highly recommend reading that one as well, especially if you do really like Thousand Miles to Freedom. I would pick up The Girl with Seven Names. You'll find a lot of similarities, but also differences, and it might help give you a better picture. There's a collection of done by a newspaper reporter called Ask a North Korean. He gets together a group of North Koreans and then poses questions to them, puts them in there. This is great for classroom use because you can pull it out by a specific question. The sections are pretty short. Oftentimes, it's only a couple of pages, and you'll get maybe two or three people answering the same question. So it's pretty interesting, and you can pull out just the female North Koreans if you want to stay on the same topic we've been on. If you want to focus on more males' views, A River in Darkness was phenomenal. I think it's actually my favorite North Korean memoir. The man who wrote this, he was half Japanese, half North Korean. His family moved from Japan to North Korea when North Korea was starting up after the Korean War ended. His father thought they were going to move to like the Garden of Eden, and it turns out to be very, very different. He's eventually able to escape through a lot of sneakery, if that's, I know that's not a word, but sneakiness by the Japanese embassy in China. So it was a great book. It's real short. In fact, I think it's shorter than A Thousand Miles to Freedom. And then if you like graphic novels, Guy Delisle, he's done a lot of just great graphic novels. One of them is A Journey to North Korea, and he talks about his experience in North Korea. He has a similar one about his experience in China, another one about Burma. The art style is usually pretty simple, but he puts a lot of depth into the story. So those would be worth checking out. All right. And that's all we got.